Hello, good morning, and welcome to Unacademy IAS, a one-stop destination for all the English medium civil services aspirants. Welcome to another session of Hindu News Analysis, dated 12th December 2024. Now, before I start the discussion, have a look at the topics that I've taken. The total number of topics are 11. Most of them are from Hindu newspaper, but to make the discussion much more comprehensive and make it as a one-stop destination for all of your current affairs requirement, I've also taken additionally the articles from Indian Express as well as Hindustan Times. Before I start the discussion, here is a very important announcement. The journey from an aspirant to an IAS officer requires smart work as well as a dedicated work. And one of the smartest decisions that you can take right now is by subscribing to our English programs or IAS programs. Once you subscribe, you will get unlimited access to our online classes, prelims as well as a mains test series, and also mentorship assistance. And not just this. If you take a subscription for 9 months, we will provide additional 9 months of subscription free of cost. You pay only for 9 months, we will extend and ensure that you will get access to all of this for 18 months. Same thing if you purchase the subscription for 12 as well as 18 months. But please make a note of this. If you want to get this extension, do not forget to use the code IAS English. Let's start the discussion. The first article that I've taken is from Indian Express. Most of you have the habit of looking at the articles being discussed only from Hindu. I'm making a change today. I've taken the first article from the headlines of Indian Express. And those who are wondering, sir, how do I read this? I do not have subscription for Indian Express, etc. Do not worry. The PPT will be uploaded in our Telegram channel. If you're yet to subscribe, please do join. The first article, concern in government, private sector profit at 15-year high, but salaries are stagnant. Very recently, certain macroeconomic data was published by the government. And one of the important data which raised a concern not only in the government segment but also in the private sector, experts as well, was the GDP growth. The GDP growth rate which was reported, which was around 5%, has raised concern regarding the slowdown in the Indian economy. And one of the reasons which has been cited because of which the growth has slowed down is said to be the consumption demand. It is said to be the consumption demand. Essentially, how much money I will spend, you will spend, your competitors will spend on goods and services using which they consume, and this will contribute to higher demand, and this will contribute to higher production, which will contribute to higher gross domestic product. And the concern which has been raised is that the consumption demand has slowed down, and one of the prominent reasons for the slowdown in the consumption demand has said to be the slow growth in the incomes or the salaries. The growth in the incomes or salaries has been said to be very, very slow. In fact, many experts have pointed out that the situation is so bad that in many of the cases, the rise in the incomes or salaries are much lesser compared to the inflation rate. What is the meaning of this? Imagine you have a salary of 100 or wages of 100 rupees. And your wages have been increased by 5%, which essentially means you are earning 105. But during the same in the same duration, what if inflation rate is 7%? What if inflation rate is 6.5%? This will essentially reduce your purchasing power. What you are able to purchase at 100 rupees earlier, today, you will not be able to purchase the same quantity of goods and services. So many experts have pointed out that the growth in the salaries is very less compared to inflation rate in recent times. And this has essentially led to a situation wherein, though you are experiencing a rise in your salary, though you are getting more salary compared to last year, you are not able to purchase more quantity of goods and services because the earnings is negative here because of higher inflation rate. Now, to add fuel to the discussion, last week, the chief economic advisor gave a statement. He said that in case of India, we are seeing the profits of the companies are increasing very fast. They are generating very high amount of profits. But at the same point of time, the rise in the wages is lagging behind. It is very, very slow. And if the companies do not introspect this, if the companies do not look into this and address this, there will be more harm done to the companies themselves. How so? Let me give you one example, historical example, to make you understand the importance of wages or salaries. 110 years ago, that is in 1914, Mr. Henry Ford, who is considered to be the pioneer in, let's say, manufacturing of cars, increased the wages that they paid to the employees of the Ford company to $5 a day. Understand the importance here. The company Ford increased the wages that they pay, daily wages to the employees, to $5 a day. And this created a buzz in the market. The reason was that this hike to a $5 a day wage was almost more than twice compared to what was the market average wages. The market average wages was less than half of what was provided by the Ford company. And the same company went on to revolutionize manufacturing, industrialization, and created so many different systems which are being used by multiple companies in the market today. And all of this essentially boils down to increasing productivity of the employees, ensuring that employees will have sufficient amount of salaries which will create a satisfaction which will contribute to higher productivity. And in recent times, there is a lot of discussion regarding this. The discussion has been centered around the gap in the pay packages between a CEO and a grassroots level worker. In many of the examples, I'm pretty sure you must have seen, the difference between the pay packages is such huge. It is so high, it has basically disincentivized the workers. It has affected the productivity of the labor market. And the chief economic advisor simply says, you will have to introspect. You will have to address this particular problem. Because all the time, you cannot expect only government to implement policies. You cannot expect only the government to invest a lot of money and create employment. Something has to be done even by the private sector as well. Private sector plays a very important role. So these are certain important points. Cut to the article now. Come to the article. What does the article say? The article basically provides information regarding surveys which have been conducted considering multiple private sector companies. And what does the survey say? The survey simply says the profits of the companies between 2019 to 2023 have increased almost 4 times. 4x basically means 4 times. The profits of the companies between 2019 to 23 have increased almost 4 times. In the same duration, if you look at what has happened to wages for the workers who are working in these companies, the wages have risen in the range of 1% to around 4%. Look at the difference. The profits have increased by 4 times, but the wages of the employees who are working in these particular companies have increased in the range of 1% to 4%. Such a huge disparity. And some of you might be thinking, sir, in that case, what are the companies doing? What is the problem here? What are the companies doing? Why are they not paying wages? The argument here is the companies have used a lot of these profits to essentially deleverage. Remember this. Essentially, they have used a lot of these profits to deleverage. Deleverage essentially means to reduce their leverage. They have borrowed heavily from the market. Now, they have earned huge amount of profit. They have used most of these profits to pay back the loans, reduce the debt, essentially deleveraging. And the same argument has been put forward even in the context of Government of India reducing the corporate taxes. That is essentially the Government of India back in the year 2019 reduced the corporate tax rate from 30% to 22%. Although I'm saying 22%, effective rate, effective is including cesses and surcharges, will be around 25. Before reduction, effective was somewhere in the range of 33 to 34. It was reduced to, right, basically card rate of 22%. And when we have evaluated what has been the impact of this, we have seen that the companies have used this benefit, they have reduced their debt, they have deleveraged, and there has not been much benefits in the form of, let's say, higher investment, higher employment generation, etc. So the argument which has been provided in the article is very, very simple. The private sector companies have increased their profits, but in terms of higher salaries, employment generation, they have not performed very, very well. And this, the chief economic advisor says, is a self-defeating. Reason being, if the companies do not pay sufficient amount of salary, if I'm not given sufficient amount of salary or hike is not sufficient even to offset the inflation impact, then what will happen to the demand for the goods and services? The demand for the goods and services would be affected. If the demand is affected, obviously the sales in the market of the goods and services which are manufactured, which are sold by the very same companies, their sales would be affected. And if the sales is affected, their bottom line, that is effectively their profitability, would also be affected. And this again would have an impact on how many jobs they are creating, how much is the hike they are providing to their employees. And if the companies do not provide sufficient amount of hikes, this is a very, very predominant issue in case of employment market in India today. The companies are offering a hike of 1%, increment of 2%, 3%, whereas inflation rate is more than 6%. So obviously the employees do not have sufficient incentives, sufficient drive to produce more, which will hamper the productivity. Right? So these are certain very important points which have been mentioned in the article, which has been published in today's Indian Express, the front page article, headlines today in Indian Express. So associated with this, I've given a question for answer writing practice for you. Discuss the factors that have contributed to slowdown in the Indian economy in recent months, and also recommend solutions. A 15-marker question in 250 words, you are supposed to write the answer. Let me go to the next article. There is a central page article, editorial page article in today's Indian Express regarding assisted dying. Now, what are the important points here? Very recently, at the end of the month of November 2024, of course, the Great Britain or the Britain Parliament, essentially the House of Commons, passed a bill. The name of the bill is a Terminally Ill Adults End of Life Bill. Now, what are the important points here? This particular bill was introduced, discussed, debated, and voted upon and was passed by the House of Commons. And now the bill will be sent to Public Bill Committee, which will evaluate the provisions in the bill. Public Bill Committee, which will evaluate the provisions in the bill, and if there are any changes to be made or recommendations in amendments, etc., will be taken into consideration. After this, from the House of Commons, it will be sent to House of Lords and again debated, voted upon and passed. Now, this is point number one. Point number two, when the voting took place in the House of Commons, something peculiar was observed. What is peculiar? Generally, whenever a bill is introduced, the members of the government or the political party which has formed the government, the members of this political party are issued a whip. That is essentially a directive by the head of the, let's say, the parliamentary committee. They will simply say that the government is in favor of the bill, you are supposed to vote in favor. But in case of this particular bill, no such direction was issued. No whip was issued. Essentially, the members of this house were asked to, based on their conscience, vote. Whatever is your viewpoint, basically on that, you cast your vote. And that is the precise reason even the members of the same political party which has formed the government have voted against this particular bill, have raised a concern regarding this particular bill. But what are the important provisions in this? This bill essentially introduces or legalizes assisted dying in the Britain now. For example, imagine there is a patient, he is terminally ill. And this particular patient doesn't have too much of life left now. The doctors might simply say you might have around 3 months to 5 months left out. But the process will be very cumbersome. You'll be facing a lot of pains. You'll have to undergo a lot of, let's say, procedures, etc. So if the process itself is taxing, if it is going to have a lot of impact on the mental health of the patient and there is no scope of recovery now, rather than allowing the patient to go through this grilling process, why not allow him in dying? Why not assist him in dying? That is essentially the cornerstone of the bill which has been introduced. And some of you might be thinking, sir, don't we have something similar to that in India? My dear, in case of India, the Supreme Court of India has legalized, has essentially upheld passive euthanasia. In case of assisted dying, essentially what will happen is, there is a particular process. The patient will have to approach a doctor, submit documentation, will have to give the consent, right, saying that I'm ready for assisted dying. Then this will be referred to another doctor. Approvals will be sought from both of the doctors. Then it will be sent to the High Court judge. And once the approval is given by the judge, certain approved medication will be provided to the patient who has to inject it himself or herself. I hope you understand this. Doctor will not inject it. The patient itself has to inject it himself or herself, but this medicine will be approved and this will be provided to the patient. Basically, to provide an escape from the grueling process in the coming months. That is essentially assisted dying. Whereas in case of India, we have passive euthanasia. In case of passive euthanasia, the medical support that is provided, let's say a ventilator or a food pipe, etc., if there is no way that the situation of the patient will improve and there is, let's say, not much hope left, in such cases, after you get the approval, this medical support is withdrawn. So that is passive euthanasia. But in case of Britain, what they've introduced is assisted dying. Now, during the debates, what the author simply says is, during debates, different viewpoints were basically put forward by different members in the House. And these points which were put forward can be used as a parameter for further deliberation, or as, let's say, a framework for further deliberations in other, let's say, economies or other countries as well. For example, what were the viewpoints which were put forward against this kind of a bill? Generally, whenever you discuss these kind of issues, there is a ethical angle to this. There is a religious angle to this. And, essentially, there is also an angle where many of the experts will say there is a scope of misuse of this. Let me give you one more example so that you have a very comprehensive understanding of such issues. Very recently, USA presidential elections were held. One of the issues which generally, apart from many other issues, one of the very, very important ethical issue which will divide the people into different political parties is essentially the debate surrounding abortion. Should abortion beyond certain limit be allowed? Should it be prohibited? There are two parties. Both the parties have completely opposing viewpoints. One party simply says it is against the will of the God, religious angle. Another party says it is akin to freedom. Let the person decide what should be done with their body. Same argument has been put forward even in the context of assisted dying. So some of the arguments in favor are: 1, the patient is already suffering. We should not elongate the suffering. Let's end it soon, because there is no scope of returning from this particular point. Even the doctors are saying there is no treatment beyond this. Whatever we do, the situation will only get worsened from now. So when you know that you have 3 months to live or 5 months to live, there is no way, or there should not be more pain inflicted on the patient. Let's finish it off soon. That is the first argument. Second argument is my body, my decision. Same argument in case of abortion as well. My body, my decision. What I should do with my body is basically part of my fundamental right. It is part of liberty. I should be able to take a decision. I do not want to continue. I want somebody to assist me. I want somebody to provide me something so that I can pass away peacefully. That's the second argument. Third argument, in countries where population is very high, and if the per capita incomes are low, the people who are falling below poverty line are very, very high. They will find it very difficult to pay for such medical treatment. They'll find it very difficult. Week on week basis or day to day basis, they'll have to keep on spending money to get medicines, to get drugs, to get treatment, etc. And that might become a very big financial burden on the families. Let's reduce this. I know some of you will not accept these arguments. I know that. You will be on the other side. That is on the counter of this particular side of assisted dying. The arguments or counter arguments will be, there can be a slippery slope. What do you mean by slippery slope? What if judiciary will look at this bill once it becomes an act, and the judiciary will start interpreting the provisions of the act and expand the coverage of the bill? What we did not want to cover today, what if the interpretation is done by the judiciary and that would be included, or Supreme Court, or let's say the highest court of the land will include that? That will defeat the purpose of legislative procedure. That is one concern. Second concern is there can be misuse as well. There can be misuse. What is the misuse? What if the person is disabled? In fact, to be very clear, the provisions in the terminally ill adults bill which has been proposed and passed here excludes disabled people. Disabled people are not supposed to be covered under this. Anybody who is adult above the age of 18 years is in the right frame of mind to take a decision and has stayed in this country for at least 12 months now. In addition to the doctor saying he may not have more than 6 months to live, only such people are to be covered under this particular bill, or once it becomes an act. So there might be misuse of the provision, or in certain cases, this is a very valid concern, by the way. What if people who are supposed to take care of the people, right, the terminally ill people, will force them to opt for assisted dying? They'll keep on pressurizing them, they'll keep on taunting them, they'll not provide right medicines, etc. because there might be a financial angle as well. What if there is a misuse of this? So these are some of the counter arguments. In addition to this, the religious angle or the religious argument. It is will of the God. You have been given life by God. You do not have the right to take it away. So these are some of the points which have been discussed. And in the context of India, like I said, in the context of India, what is provided is a passive euthanasia. Remember this. In India, it is a passive euthanasia. Very recently, Government of India has issued the protocols or the procedures that we are supposed to follow after the Supreme Court order which was issued in 2019 and again restructured or basically revamped a bit in 2023. That is essentially in the Common Cause versus Union of India, because there were certain concerns raised by experts saying that the procedure which has been prescribed right now in the 28th judgment is impractical, time-consuming process, a cumbersome process, right, which will cause a lot of delays, etc. And that's a precise reason in 2023, Supreme Court of India again basically has reworked what was announced back in 2018, allowing passive euthanasia in India. Done? So these are certain important points. Go through them. Now, to basically make you equipped for mains examination, I've given additional one more practice question for answer writing. What are the ethical, legal, and social implications of assisted dying or euthanasia in the contemporary society? Because these kind of questions can be asked in ethics paper, can be asked in social issues paper, can be asked under polity paper as well. So please be very careful, have sufficient data or have sufficient knowledge to write answer according to the paper in which the question has been asked. Okay, now next article, space exploration, is it causing climate change? Very interesting article, by the way. Is space exploration causing climate change? Is it contributing to climate change against which we are fighting? Whenever you talk about climate change conventions, for example, Conference of Parties, I'm pretty sure you must have come across one criticism against COP is that whenever they conduct a COP, these leaders of the world or the representatives of different member countries along with many other people will travel in aeroplanes, will stay in very big hotels, will travel in cars, etc. by causing pollution. They talk about reducing pollution, but they themselves are causing the pollution. That is generally one of the criticisms that is levied against the Conference of Parties discussion. In the same way, whenever you talk about space exploration, although there's a commercial angle to that, but most of the times the space exploration is discussed in the context of doing good for the society. For example, space exploration, we talk in terms of understanding, is there a life beyond Earth? Understanding what kind of activities are happening on Sun. Can we use that somewhere in the form of technology on the Earth? Understanding what is happening on the Moon, etc. and the impact of that on Earth, etc., etc., etc. In addition to that, usually when you talk about space, we simply equate that with satellites. And what is the use of satellite? We will be using satellite to basically find out how the weather is going to change. Whether it is going to have a rainfall, what is happening in terms of, let's say, mobilization of the people, etc., etc. There are different applications of satellite. But at the same point of time, there is also large number of criticisms that are levied against space exploration. What are the criticisms? The most important criticism that is being discussed in this article is space exploration contributing to climate change? I'll come to that. But in addition to this, let's expand the view now. Is it climate change only criticism against space exploration? Absolutely no. There is always an argument that space can be weaponized. It can be weaponized. How so? Using satellites, you can understand the defense movements happening in other countries. Using satellites, you can launch many of these weapons, etc. So weaponization of a space is also a very important criticism. Second criticism, do we need to spend so much amount of money to understand what is happening on the Moon? Why not spend the same amount of money in agriculture? I know many of you will simply say, but sir, wait, that is a counter argument. So you are spending hundreds of billions of dollars throughout all the countries. You are spending hundreds of billions of dollars every year. Why not use the same amount of money to address poverty? Why not use the same amount of money to improve infrastructure, etc.? Because the point is very simple. If you're spending money on X, you cannot use it for Y. That is how economy works, or economics as a subject works. You cannot use the same amount of money in another place because you can't, right, have all the needs satisfied. So argument is, why not use the same amount of money for other purposes rather than simply saying, I don't have sufficient money for healthcare, I don't have sufficient money for infrastructure, etc. So second criticism is expenditure. Second criticism is expenditure. Third criticism is, we are talking about ecology now, right? Climate change. Let's connect it to the ecology and climate change. Whenever you want to conduct space exploration, you need rockets. Now look at the impact. You need rockets. But to manufacture rockets, you will need multiple metals. Correct? You need multiple metals. Rockets are made using metals only. They will not use plastic, they will not use paper. But when you require metals to manufacture parts of the rocket, don't you think this will lead to mining activity? And once you talk about mining activity, will it not contribute to emission? This is point number one. Point number two, you talk about rockets. Rockets will use fuels. Now, when you will basically use fuels, you will burn fuels, cryogenic or any form of fuels, etc. When you burn fuels, there will be emissions. In fact, in the article itself, they have mentioned something by the name of black carbon. Black carbon. Black carbon is PM 2.4, main component of PM 2.5, particulate matter 2.5. It is one of the most polluting in terms of, let's say, causing pollution and having an impact on albedo. It absorbs a huge amount of sunlight. It doesn't reflect. It absorbs a very huge amount of sunlight. And imagine if black carbon gets settled on, let's say, ice caps. It will not allow emissions to go back. Albedo will be affected, and that will contribute to more and more, right, let's say, loss of ice caps that is being observed. So obviously, when you use fuels, you will burn them, you will cause a lot of emissions, and in many cases, it has been seen that burning of fuels when the rocket is taking off will contribute to tearing of ozone layer, impact on the ozone layer. That's the second point. Point number three. Now, once the rocket is taken, imagine now we are talking about reusable rockets. Yesterday itself, I discussed the concept of reusable rockets. We want to reduce the cost of, let's say, the operations now. Reusable rockets will play a very important role, right, etc., etc. But one of the concerns raised regarding reusable rockets is that if you use reusable rockets, the machines or the engines will be heavy. Engine has to use more fuel to basically come back and land on the earth, which again means what? You are going to consume more and more fuels. You are going to use more and more of metals. So that will again cause problems in terms of climate change. Point number four, when the rockets will launch the satellites, let's say, will get settled in the lower Earth orbit. Right now, thousands of rockets are basically hovering in the lower Earth orbit. But just like on land, if you imagine, let's say, the traffic in India, many of the cities, Delhi traffic or the notorious Bangalore traffic, etc., where the length of the road and the width of the road is limited, number of vehicles are very high. Imagine the same situation in case of space. In the lower Earth orbit, when thousands of rockets are there, there will be some of the rockets which are not usable, which have been damaged, where the spare parts have been taken off or which have been destroyed like this because of an impact, etc. So, lot of these components, space debris, are present in the orbit. And the problem with these orbits, the article simply says, the problem is, many of the times these smaller components or the parts which are flying in the space like this are moving at a very fast speed. In many of the cases, more than 29 km per hour. And if these parts will hit, let's say, the working rockets, working satellites, there will be a damage caused to the satellite now. Now you'll simply say, but sir, we have a technology, we have maneuver capacity now. We will maneuver the satellite in such a way that we will not be hit. That will again increase the cost of technology you are going to use. That was one of the concern regarding, right, let's say the rocket as well as the satellites. Even understand this, you are talking about human space explorations. That is, you want to send people to moon, you want to send people to International Space Station, etc. In such cases, more and more rockets are used to fly, let's say, land satellites in these lower Earth orbits. More will be the traffic. Higher the traffic, more cases of, right, let's say, accidents happening. And especially with manned exploration, more, right, concern it is. So these are some of the concerns which have been raised in this article. And basically the discussion here, or the central point here is, we are using, let's say, satellites. We are launching rockets and placing the satellites in the orbit. We want to use the satellite for good reasons. We want to get the usage for the society. We want to map cities. We want to understand how climate is changing. We want to understand what is happening in the rivers, etc., etc. But there is always a danger that, because there is no guidelines right now, there is no centralized authority, there is nobody to manage traffic in the space right now, in the future, this might become a big concern. So what is the solution then? What is the way forward? Right? One of the way forward that has been recommended is, we have to work on the fuels. We have to work on different types of fuels. Rather than using hydrogen, rather than using the solid fuels, can we start moving more and more towards the other types of fuels such as cryogenic? But again, the question will be, is it feasible? Because the other fuels are very, very costly. So feasibility will become a problem, right? But we have to work on that. Second one, can we have an international framework? I'll just give you one example. Very recently, there was a discussion regarding a framework to control production of plastic. Before that, there was a discussion in Conference of Parties regarding controlling of emission. So can we have a framework which is acceptable to all the countries which are there in the space exploration, using which we can implement certain policies? For example, policies regarding what kind of rockets you can use, because the kind of rockets will also mean the kind of fuels that you're using. The kind of fuels will imply the kind of emissions that will contribute whenever you take off a rocket or whenever you launch a rocket. So can we have a framework? Can we have a framework? Because please understand, right now there is an organization, right? The name of the organization is, under the United Nations, the Committee on Peaceful Use of Outer Space. Can we have more than 100 member countries who are the members? Initially, around 18 countries were there. Today, more than 100 member countries are there. Can we bring all of these countries and have a convention? Have a framework which is acceptable to all the countries. And the third one is, we will have to have a better way to manage the traffic in the outer space now. We will have to have a better way. There can be data sharing between countries, because right now, what kind of satellites, let's say USA is using, all of the data, sensitive data, they will not share with China. China will not share that with India. India will not share this with, let's say, other country. So can we have one solution where we will, all the countries will agree and we will have a better traffic management in the space? So these are some of the recommendations that have been provided regarding the impact of space exploration on the climate change. Okay. Now, associated with this, I've given an MCQ. MCQ number 44. Consider the following statements regarding black carbon. It will increase the albedo when settled on the snow cap. It will have a very high albedo. it has a major component, or it is a major component of PM10. How many of the statements are true? Do let me know in the chat section. If you do not know, don't worry, I'll discuss the answer at the end. Next article, front page article in Hindu newspaper today. Indian scientists have developed a novel gene therapy to provide one-time solution for hemophilia. Right? What is the issue here? A very important article in Science and Technology. Be careful. So hemophilia is a genetic disorder which will basically be transmitted from the parent to the child. In hemophilia, what will happen is, whenever you have a cut, right? Let's say you're doing some work, you're opening a book, you will have a paper cut. You're using a razor, you will have a cut. You're doing any other physical work, or even you might be sitting, something will fall on you and you will have a cut. Generally, what will happen is, within couple of minutes, the blood which is flowing out will stop. That is essentially called as clotting of the blood. Correct? Right? There is a blood clot. And whenever the blood is flowing, let's say this is a vein, or right, let's say any kind of a capillary, etc., which is carrying blood like this. If there is a cut here, the blood will start coming out of this. And when this cut will happen, there are blood platelets. There are blood platelets which will basically combine with protein. I'm using the term protein here, but technically this is called as a factor. Right? So whenever there's a cut, the blood platelets will combine with protein, which is factor, and they will form a clot. And that is exactly what will stop the further loss of the blood. But when a person suffers from hemophilia and has a cut like this, compared to a normal person, this person will lose more blood. The loss of the blood in case of patient with hemophilia will be much higher compared to what a normal person will lose whenever this situation will happen. And hemophilia is not just associated with the cut and loss of the blood. In many cases, the punctures, or let's say the cut, can happen within the skin as well. For example, let's say a person with hemophilia is walking, suddenly will experience within the blood capillaries, there might be a cut. And if this is not treated today, and this is internal in nature, you may not understand, if this is not treated today, tomorrow it can lead to more complications for the patient with hemophilia. Right now, please understand, right now, the gene therapy which is available in the market is approved by USA. It is approved by USA. The name of the gene therapy is Roctavian. Roctavian, please remember the name. This is the only type of gene therapy that is available in the market approved by US FDA. But the treatment cost is very high. One of the reasons it is said that the cost of the treatment, or let's say getting treated for hemophilia, it is very higher because India has the second highest number of patients, or let's say people with hemophilia. But the number of people who have hemophilia, the pool of the people is very small. The pool of the people is very small, which means the kind of customers which are available for the companies, number of customers is limited. For these limited customers, these products will have to be generated or created, produced. The cost would be higher. The logic says, whenever you manufacture anything in scale, economies of scale, whenever you manufacture anything in large quantity, per unit cost will be lesser. But here, the patient pool is very small. So what has been done, or what does the article say? In India now, the scientists have developed a new type of gene therapy. The scientists have developed new type of a gene therapy which is said to be much more effective. Which is said to be much more effective. How so? Whenever you talk about hemophilia, the incidences of loss of blood generally take place very often for these patients. But in case of this gene therapy which has been introduced or tested by the Indian scientist, the loss of blood cases or the instances of loss of blood have not been reported even after following the test patients for more than 14 months now. So many of the experts have hailed this invention. They are saying this is a groundbreaking work which will basically help us in treating the patients with hemophilia, right, etc. Done? So these are certain important points. Before I go forward, in context of hemophilia, please remember certain more technical terms. Hemophilia can be two types. Hemophilia type A and type B, just like diabetes. Hemophilia type A and type B. Whenever you have type A, which is majority of the cases, essentially you will not be having factor 8. You will not be having factor 8, that is proteins. These are the types of proteins which will bind with platelets and form a clot. You will be having very less amount or very negligible amount of factor 8. And if you have hemophilia B, that will be factor 9. These kind of questions can be asked in prelims. Be very, very careful. Okay, next. Supreme Court of India has issued an order asking the state governments and the center to implement the provisions to basically end manual scavenging in India. What are the important points here? Understand this. The government of India back in 1993 itself had introduced a law prohibiting manual scavenging. But despite introducing the law, it has been seen that over a period of time, because of various issues, the manual scavenging has continued as a practice. Again in 2013, again in the year 2013, Government of India introduced a new law, prohibition of employment as Manual Scavengers Act. And this was introduced in 2013. But despite introducing a new piece of legislation, implementing this, there have been instances of manual scavenging observed. According to the government data, between 2018 and 2023, more than 400 people have died who were practicing manual scavenging or who were employed as manual scavengers. And so now the question arises, if there is already a law, if manual scavenging is prohibited, then why the practice has been continued in India? Many of the experts argue that generally, the prevalence of the class or caste system, has contributed to the continuous practice of manual scavenging. Because the people who are forced to work as manual scavengers are those people who are at the lowest level in the society when you arrange them according to their caste. So the argument here is the caste divide that is present in the society is contributing to the continued practice. Second one is people who practice or who are forced into manual scavenging generally are seen to be from the lowest level of economic category as well. That is very, very poor households. They do not have educational sufficient qualification, no sufficient financial assistance or resources which will force them to work as manual scavengers. So in addition to this, many experts argue, social scientists argue that it is the fault of the states as well. It is the fault of the states because the first step to giving a solution is accepting that there is a problem. I'll repeat the statement. The first step to giving a solution or getting a solution is accepting that there is a problem in the first place. But in many cases, the ministers, when they are questioned, the states, when they are questioned, etc., they will deny that there is any practice of manual scavenging. Right? So that is the reason many experts argue that despite the prohibition, despite the order of the Supreme Court of India, the cases of manual scavenging are happening, people are dying. In fact, Supreme Court of India, couple of years ago, increased the amount of compensation that is supposed to be paid when a person is forced or when a person is employed as a manual scavenger and has, let's say, died during the operations or has got certain injuries. The amount of compensation was increased by Supreme Court. Now, the bench of Supreme Court has issued an order to the states, has issued an order to the government. They are simply saying why the provisions of the act are not being implemented. Why are we not able to basically prohibit, eliminate this particular practice of manual scavenging? I want what is done by the states, I want a report on that. Right? Essentially, that is the order which has been issued by Supreme Court. In addition to this, please make a note of this particular scheme that was introduced by the government last year, 2023. The government of India in 2023 introduced a scheme by the name of Namaste. Namaste stands for National Action for Mechanized Sanitation Ecosystem. Under this particular scheme, Government of India, it's a central sector scheme. Central sector scheme. Government of India wants to eliminate any kind of practice where the scavengers, or let's say the cleaners or the people who are working to clean sanitation department, etc., they should not come in any kind of a physical contact with the fecal matter. Sir, how that can be done? With mechanization, with many other tools, etc. So the argument of the government is, we will ensure that people who are working in the sanitation department, they will not be, right? They will not be in any case allowed to come into physical contact with the fecal matter. We will use equipments. We will train the people. We will ensure that they are basically, right, provided training. They are provided with the skills, etc. to ensure that the physical manual scavenging will not be conducted. So these are certain very important points regarding the order issued by the Supreme Court of India. Be very careful. Next one, the Lok Sabha has passed a railway bill. Lok Sabha has passed a railway bill. It was introduced a couple of months ago in the Lok Sabha. What are the important points? Point number one, please understand this. Earlier, that is before independence, there was a Railway Act. Before independence, there was a Railways Act. And in 1905, again before independence, there was also one more act introduced, which was named as Railways Board Act. Railways Board Act, 1905. Now, under the Railways Board Act, there were certain provisions which basically talked about railway boards, and railway boards essentially is that entity under the Ministry of Railways which will take care of operations of railways, which will take care of establishment and maintenance of railway tracks in India, etc. So there is one act, Railways Act, right, 1890s. This was revamped, restructured by the government again in 1989. So Government of India introduced one more act in 1989 which subsumed the provisions of the earlier Railways Act. Now please look at the complexity. There are certain provisions under Railway Boards Act which will talk about operations of railways, and there are certain provisions under Railways Act also which talks about railways. This will lead to complexity. If you want to implement something, you will have to keep on referring to provisions from two different laws. So what Government of India now has announced is, whatever are the provisions of the Railways Board Act will be subsumed under the Railways Act. Is the point clear? Whatever are the provisions of the Railways Board Act, they would be subsumed under Railways Act. Right? Instead of two laws, now you will have only one law to refer to. This is the first very important change that has been proposed in the Railways Bill, which was passed by Lok Sabha. Point number two. Whenever you talk about railways, there is always a concern regarding the financial capacity of railways. That is, the railways in many years provides a lot of subsidies for the passengers. And as a result of this, this will contribute in railways entering into losses. And this has happened very recently as well. Now, what is the solution to that? There was a committee which was set up which gave recommendations regarding this. And I would implore you, not order, implore you, remember this name of the committee. Why? You will understand when I say the name of the committee. The Government of India had set up a committee which was headed by Bibek Debroy. All of you understand why this committee becomes important now? Bibek Debroy committee to restructure, revamp railways in India. And this committee recommended that we should have a separate entity. We should have an independent authority which will be given the powers to determine what is the tariff pricing. Which will given the power to determine the tariffs now. Which will be given the power to determine the pricing of the tickets. Because one concern, like I said earlier, we provide subsidies for railway tickets. Done. So this is one more important recommendation. Now, the recommendations were given in 2015. Government of India proposed an entity back then, but it was not implemented. Under the Railways Bill, this is being again proposed. There will be an entity which will be set up under the Railways Bill once it becomes an act, which will have the powers to determine tariffs. That's a second very important change. Third very important change is regarding railway zones. And there is one more committee regarding this. Remember the name as well. 2014 Sridharan Committee. Sridharan Committee. Right? There are multiple railway zones in India, which has been a convention, which has been a very old practice. Railways, the whole operations are divided into zones. There are around 18 zones in India. But whenever you talk about development of infrastructure, maintenance of infrastructure in these zones, the zones do not have sufficient powers. And that is exactly what the government now says. We will provide more and more powers, more and more, right, let's say, authority to these railway zones. More authority will be provided to these zones, which will have the power to implement multiple types of infrastructure. That's a third very important point. Fourth very important point, under the Railways Board Act, there was a railway board, I said. There was a railway board, but it did not have any kind of a statutory authority. Railway board was set up, but it did not have any kind of a statutory recognition. With railway bill now, with this railway bill, government says there will be statutory status provided to railway board. Point number one. And point number two, with this provision of statutory status, Government of India now will have to decide the powers to decide what will be the composition of the railway board. What will be the composition? How many members will be there? How they will be appointed? Right? What will be the roles and responsibilities, etc. The power will be given to the government under the new bill provisions. So these are the four very important changes which have been proposed in the Railway Amendment Bill, but there are opposition. There are certain criticisms against it. What is the criticism? Many of the opposition members or opposition party members have raised concern regarding why does government have power to determine the composition of this railway board? Why should government have that kind of a power? Why not simply define in the bill itself what is the composition? Right? Why should government have all the power? Don't you think that will increase the interference of the government in the operations? That is one. Second one is government of India promoting privatization? That has been a concern, by the way. That has been a concern. In fact, private sector entry is already there in railways. It is already there in railways. This was in fact recommended by Bibek Debra committee. But be very careful here. The committee categorically stated they are not in favor of privatization. They are only in favor of allowing private sector entry into railways. They want private sector to participate in the operations of railways. They are not in favor of privatization of railways, which basically means government will sell away the ownership. No, that is not the recommendation here. So there is a concern which has been raised. Is it privatization? Is the government in favor of privatization? Why so much changes are being done by the government? That is one more concern which has been raised by the opposition members, to which the railway minister has categorically stated there is no thought of privatization. Government is not going to do any kind of privatization in railways. Done? Right. So, MCQ number 45. How many of the following is or the recommendations of Bibek Debra committee on railways? Ministry of Railways should decide on tariff, allow entry of private sector in railway operations, Expansion of railways activities in non-core activities to strengthen the finances. How many of them are correct? Do let me know in the chat section. Otherwise, wait for some time. I'll give you the key answer. Next article, UNHCR team has visited Jammu. Right? What are the important points here? This has become a political hot potato now. The issue is very simple. There is a Muslim community that is basically from Myanmar. Right? Rakhine state from Myanmar. The name of the Muslim community is Rohingyas. Now, in the last 3 decades or 2.5 decades, what has happened in Myanmar, because of that, lot of this population through Bangladesh has entered into India. Many experts argue that they have entered into India through West Bengal, and some say along with West Bengal they have used even the routes in the northeastern states to enter into India. But as per the data, more than 40,000 Rohingyas are present in different states in India. And out of this, more than 13,000, including Bangladeshi as well as Rohingyas, more than 13,000 of them are present in Jammu and Kashmir now. They are present in Jammu and Kashmir. What is the issue? The government of India says that these are illegal immigrants. These are illegal immigrants. They have not been given any kind of a status. They have not been allowed to enter into India. They have not come through legal route. They have illegally entered into India and they are located in different parts of India. And it has become such a headache now. Reason being, the government says many of them are involved in illegal activities. And because these are illegal, they are basically present in India illegally. It will also become a problem in terms of national security. For example, in Jammu and Kashmir, the government says many of them are present. They are located very nearby to defense installations. So it has become a problem in terms of national security as well. And in many cases, it has been found that the homeowners in many of the states here, the homeowners, without checking for the validation, without knowing whether these are Indians or not, they are simply renting the homes to them. For example, if you go to Delhi and you want to take a house on rent, you'll have to provide all the documents. You'll have to get the police verification done. Similar verification drive is also being conducted in Jammu and Kashmir now. The whole idea is we have to identify who are illegally present in India and take them and separate them. That is the policy of the government now. But what has happened is it has become more of a political discussion. Reason being, recently there was a visit by United Nations representatives. That is 2 people who are High Commissioner of Refugees, UNHCR, visited this region. They approached, they spoke to the refugees there and they wanted to speak to the police and the police did not interact with them. But in addition to this, there is a now friction that has arisen between the government in Jammu and Kashmir as well as the central government. The government of Jammu and Kashmir now says, let the central government announce what they are thinking of doing with these illegal immigrants. Because what has happened is the water supply to these people has been cut off. Electricity supply has been cut off. Although the government of Jammu and Kashmir says this is inhuman, you can't do this. You need to supply the basic necessities such as water and electricity. Now there is a question which has been lobbed to or which has been thrown to the central government as to what is the policy of the center regarding this. What are they trying to do with these illegal immigrants? That kind of a policy, the Jammu Kashmir government says, let the central government clarify. Done. But in addition to this, please remember, because there is a discussion regarding refugees, etc., etc., there is a United Nations Convention. Please remember this. United Nations Convention which has taken place, which has taken place in 1951. United Nations Refugee Convention in 1951. India is not a signatory to this. In 1967, the protocol was also issued regarding refugees. If the refugees are there, what kind of behavior, treatment shall be provided? There is a protocol for this. India is not a signatory to that as well. Done. So these are certain points regarding UNHCR team visiting Jammu and Kashmir in the context of Rohingyas. Next article, there is a ILO report which has been published. And this ILO report talks something very interesting that was actually observed in India in very recent times. I'm talking about the dispute between the company Samsung and the employees that happened couple of weeks ago. Essentially, the debate was centered around recognition of labor unions, recognition of right of the labor to negotiate with the management. Regarding that only, there is a report which has been published by ILO, and in this particular report, they mention something very interesting. The term that they've used is peak level social dialogue. PLSD. Peak level social dialogue. What is that? I'll come to that. But before that, the report says the kind of compliance which has been found in the countries, compliance in the form of allowing the labor class to negotiate, raise their voice and negotiate with the management and have a peaceful existence. This kind of a compliance has reduced across the globe. This is what the report says. The compliance with the freedom of association and effective recognition of the right of collective bargaining, that is labor unions bargaining with the management, it has deteriorated by 7% between 2015 and 2022, which essentially means the powers of the labor union has come down. The power or the importance of this has actually deteriorated in the last 7 years. Why? What has happened? The reason which has been cited by the report is essentially saying fundamental civil liberties of the workers are being trampled. Take the example of the Samsung case itself. The labor formed a group, they wanted to register a union. They were not allowed to register a union, and that was not recognized by the government. That was not recognized by the government. So essentially, this kind of a power which is available in negotiation through a trade union, you'll have to recognize it. You'll have to protect it and promote it. That is essentially what the report is saying. But much more importantly, there's a term, like I said earlier, PLSD. Remember this because this can be asked in the prelims as a simple statement-based question. PLSD essentially refers to a tripartite arrangement. Tripartite essentially means the employer, employee, and the government. These are the very important stakeholders. These three are the very important stakeholders. So why not have certain arrangements where these kind of stakeholders in the market or in the economy will talk to each other, negotiate with each other, come out with different types of systems to protect the interest of every stakeholder. That is essentially the peak level social dialogue. Before you start asking me, sir, any example of this? Can I understand this with an example? In India, remember this, in India, there is something called as Indian Labour Conference. Indian Labour Conference, ILC. And please be aware of this, Indian Labour Conference is not the same as International Labour Conference. International Labour Conference happens under the guise of ILO. The Indian Labour Conference is basically part of Government of India under the Labour Ministry. The Indian Labour Conference is basically a tripartite meeting or a conference where the employers are present, the government representatives are there, and even the labor representatives are there. They will talk to each other. Each of the side will represent what are their grievances, what can be done, etc. And what can be done by the government. The recommendations will be provided through ILC. The last time the ILC was conducted in India was back in the year 2015. After that, ILC has not been conducted. And this particular ILC in 2015 was the 46th ILC. Remember this. Done? So these are certain points regarding the report which mentions the term peak level social dialogue. Next one. The Chief Justices need longer tenures. Although lot of data is given in this article, don't worry about it. Summation of the article is simple. Very recently, the High Court justices were right, appointed. In many of the high courts, the chief justices were appointed. But the author simply says, in many cases, the chief justices, before they understand how the high court operates, what are their roles and responsibilities, either their tenure will be over, or they might be elevated to Supreme Court, or they might, right, basically be transferred to another court. So the argument of the author here is, that is N.L. Raja, senior advocate of Madras High Court. He says, whenever you talk about the appointment of the chief justices to High Court, provide them with the longer tenure. Provide them with the longer tenure, because the chief justices play a very important role. They will not only take care of the employees of the High Court, they will also take care of allocation of cases, etc., etc. There are multiple roles and responsibilities, and ensure that the chief justices will get sufficient tenure, so that these roles and responsibilities, once they understand, they can be effectively be implemented. They can effectively be implemented. Just to prove the point, there is an example which has been provided. Between 1862 to 2012, Madras High Court completed 150 years of its existence. The Madras HC has completed 150 years of its existence. Now, if you take the watermark here, 1947, if you take the watermark here, basically in these, that is 85 years, from 1862 to 1947, in these 85 years, there were 11 chief justices. 11 chief justices. And after 1947, or from 1947 to 2012, which essentially, right, will mean 65 years. 65 years, there have been 24 chief justices. 24. Do the math, CSAT calculation, you will realize that here, it is more than 7 years. On an average, a chief justice had a tenure of more than 7 years. And here, the chief justice had a tenure of, right, much below, right, 4 years. So the argument is simple, less than 3 years, less than 3 years in fact. So the argument here is, why such a short tenure are provided? Let them be provided with more tenure, so that, right, policies or their ideals, right, how they want to, right, basically ensure the high court functions, etc., their ideas can be implemented in a much better way. Done? So this is one recommendation that has been provided under polity paper. Next one, ONOS. Very recently, Government of India announced One Nation, One Subscription. The theme is very simple here. There are multiple research organizations in India, and individually, they'll keep on subscribing for multiple websites, multiple, let's say, the access which is provided for them to get access to papers, research papers. And when you count the amount of money that is being spent by these research organizations throughout India, it comes around 2,000 crore rupees. And the problem here is, individually these are, right, let's say, paying money. These are getting access. The access which is given to one organization may not be available for another. And there is so much of complexity in the system here. That is the reason Government of India simply said, no, let's do a new system where there is only a central portal that will be created, One Nation, One Subscription, where Government of India has allocated 6,000 crore rupees. For 3 years, the Government of India has allocated 6,000 crore rupees, and subscription will be paid. The money will be taken from here, and subscription will be obtained for multiple research access journals like this, and all these research organizations can use this portal as a one-stop access, a single point access to all the research material. And this is essentially One Nation, One Subscription. But when this was announced by the government, there were certain concerns raised regarding this. What were the concerns? For example, there's a concept of open access. Open access essentially means, if I write a research paper, I will upload it in a portal in such a way that it is accessible to all of you. It is accessible to all of you. All you need to do is basically join the portal or enter the portal and get the access. You don't have to pay any money. Just like my Telegram channel, which is available to all of you. Right? Weekly articles which is uploaded, you can easily log on to that particular, log on in the sense, join the Telegram channel and download it. Right? So you don't have to pay any money. Apply the same logic here. So argument is, what about open access? Is there a policy to promote open access? That clarity was not provided. Right? In many of these cases, when you need to get your, let's say, research paper published, you have to pay money. You have to pay money to get your research published. Will the money be used for, right, providing this facility for research workers? That clarification was not there. So many of the concerns were raised by many of the experts regarding the implementation of ONOS. Government of India has provided certain clarifications in a nutshell, because a lot of technicalities are provided. In a nutshell, government says, 1, we are going to allow access to all these material that is available under ONOS to all the research organizations. Either you're a high-level researcher or you're a student, doesn't matter. You will get access. Point number 2, regarding getting your papers published where you need to pay money, government is negotiating. Government also says certain amount of money, 150 CR, will be kept aside, which can be utilized to provide, right, let's say subsidize your publication. Point number 3, government also says, right, government also says the implementation of this, we are working out the details, the implementation of this will happen in stage wise. So these are some of the clarifications that have been provided regarding ONOS. Next one, SC order on the wetlands. The last article for today, and this one I have taken from Hindustan Times because there was no article on this in Hindu today. So what is the order which has been issued by Supreme Court of India? Listen to me very carefully. Supreme Court of India simply says there is a guideline which has been implemented by the government, announced and implemented in 2017, and the guideline is named as Wetlands Conservation and Management Rules 2017. Right? You have announced a guideline or rules and you have implemented. But the amount of wetlands which are supposed to be protected by the states, because the power is given to the state under these rules, the amount of identification of the wetlands has not been done by the states. They have not identified all the wetlands that are supposed to be identified and protected. Essentially, they are talking about those wetlands of a size more than 2.25 hectares. More than 2.25 hectares. So the argument is states are lagging behind. Essentially, one state has been mentioned here. Punjab has done some work in this, but many of the states are lagging behind in terms of identification of these wetlands. Because please understand this, these wetlands are first identified using satellite. Right? Using satellite technology, we will identify this is the region wetland, this is 1, this is 2, etc. Lakhs of wetlands have been identified like this. But you have to go to the ground, that is the specific area, measure the region, and if it is more than 2.25 hectares, you will have to take steps or the measures to protect this particular wetland. So the order has been issued by the Supreme Court of India. The states are yet to implement these particular measures. Now Supreme Court of India simply says, right, make a plan. Tell me how you will identify these particular wetlands. I want more than 2 lakh wetlands to be protected under these 2017 rules. Stating this, order has been issued by the Supreme Court. Done? Right? So this is in a nutshell what is given in the article here. So before I wind up the discussion, let me give you the key answers for the questions or MCQs that I have provided earlier. MCQ 44, consider the following statements regarding black carbon. It will increase the albedo when settled on snow caps. And I hope you understand this. Albedo you would have studied under geography or ecology and environment. Albedo essentially means what is the potential for reflection. How much can you reflect? And that is albedo. So it will increase the albedo when settled on the snow caps? No, it will reduce the albedo. That's the reason I said the melting of the snow caps can be increased because of submission, or let's say deposition of black carbon. It has very high albedo. No, it absorbs a lot of sunlight. It doesn't emit so much. It absorbs a lot of sunlight. It has a very less albedo. It is a major component of PM10. Wrong. It is major component of 2.5. So all the three statements are incorrect. Right option will be option D, none of them. MCQ number 45. How many of the following is or are recommendations of Bibek-Debra Committee on Railways? Ministry of Railways should decide on tariff. Absolutely no. It recommended an independent authority which will determine the tariff. Second, allow entry of private sector in railway operations? Yes, allow entry, but not privatization. Third one, expansion of railways activities in non-core activities to strengthen its finances. What is this non-core activity? Whenever you talk about railways, you can divide the activities of railways into two parts, core and non-core. Core is running, operating railways. Non-core, catering services, healthcare, education, etc. This is called as a non-core. So the recommendation of a Bibek-Debra committee was railways should not be there in the non-core. It should focus on core activity. Right, so third option or third statement is wrong. Only second statement is true. Right option for this will be option A. Only one of the statements is correct. Done. So these are the 11 articles from the Hindustan Times as well as Indian Express that I wanted to cover for you people. If you like this initiative, do not forget to hit the like button. And if you're yet to subscribe to our YouTube channel, kindly do it right now. Thank you. Have a great day.